Welcome to our world. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome you to this 46th SAPEC South Conference. Under the theme, Metamorphosis, let's we explore, innovate, and propel South Africa's traditional supply chains beyond the boundaries, with a commitment of unwavering success and no turning back. We want to propel our supply chain towards the future and take the unpropelled efficiency and growth in our logistics network. Our goal is to drive excellence in an intact logistics network, ensuring we deliver medium to long-term solutions for all its stakeholders. What is an intact logistics network? Intact logistics network is a well-orchestrated system where goods move smoothly from origin to destination with reliability, efficiency, adaptability, and meeting all the needs of the stakeholders involved. Today, we gather as a beacon of light, illuminating the past or the future with a resilient, dynamic logistics network. Let us all embrace this journey and work together to shape our logistics network. I welcome you all. Thank you. Now, as MJ mentioned, last year we stand boldly in front of you and we told you about the National Logistics Crisis Committee that is a government structure, and I'm going to call my panelists onto the podium to show you that we are committed, we want to make a difference, and we're not going to disappear. So welcome. So I'm going to ask them to introduce all of them, but on my left side is our chair, Kulisi, and he's, if you don't know him, he's currently the president of the BUSA structure. Then in the middle, and maybe you can embrace it, is the Government of National Unity. It's Mr. Irvin. And then also I've got Ian Bird that's going to take us through, that is currently our executive that coordinate all the different 8 streams. So in that, I'm quickly going to give you a snapshot where we are, and then I'm going to ask my panelists to address the certain issues, because I think you're interesting to hear their views. So we discussed the last time very much on transform. We know we have to transform our logistics network, and currently, as you read in the media, the CPPI index rated our ports as the lowest in the world. We have a different view to that because we believe there's different data sets. The segmentation of the data is not correctly, so we're not the bottom of the pile. Yes, we didn't invest over the last 13 years or 11 years in our ports infrastructure, but when we analyze the data, we're more or less here in the region between 250 and 280. We're definitely not at the bottom of the pile, and you will see in the media, we will write things over the next 2 weeks. But what we want to do, we want to transcend. We want to take it a top notch to say that in this, we need to make sure that all the activities work together. Because as you all know, a supply chain is a process. We need to bring in excellence in it, and we must make sure that we resolve the problems in an efficient and a cost-effective way. Important to understand this graph as always is that you have different modalities. You are modalities that work collectively in speed, load, in distance. And we can see the distortment currently in our logistics network because our rail infrastructure didn't take its rightful place. It's busy recovering, and there's plans, and I would like Kulisi and Irvin and Ian to address that because we are understanding the distortion and we're busy correcting it. But in that, you probably were saying, why are we so passionate about our supply chain? Because we have a very open economy. So when you look at the data flow on a daily basis, you see that we handle roughly about 12,000 containers in and out of our country. The coal and the iron ore is about 149,000 tons. Then if you look at our air freight, inbound is about 430,000 kilograms that's coming out inbound, and outbound is about 270,000. And you can see along our coastal lines how the volume is going. And Cape Town, as we are, it's on a daily basis between 2,300 to 2,400 containers. So that brings you back to why is this logistics network so important? Because it's a shared infrastructure, it's a shared responsibility, and all the different stakeholders have different behavior patterns in this logistics network. And the only way that we can stitch it together is if we work with a multimodal structure, freight villages, and we ensure those modalities do talk to each other. How did we do that? When we came last year together, we were very clear on that we're going to be transparent. I think we have done it, and we will show you. We're going to collaborate. It's no longer private sector and public sector. We need to take hands and help each other. And it's also not an easy path because we need to mature to help each other to understand each other's landscape. We work with big data analytics, and that's why the CPPI index of the World Bank is so important for us, because we're not here to blame and shame, but we can only set the records right if we have scientific data to prove what is the real facts. And then ultimately, I think we as South Africa want to do it. We want to participate with government in our logistics network. So transparent, just to show you there, we have a transparency. We meet in the NLCC on a weekly basis. There's a cadence of accountability, and we keep each other accountable that if we don't make certain deadlines, why and how can we bring it forward. There's collaboration specifically on the container line. There's all the ports. There's 7 secondments from business into Transnet to help and to make sure that we enhance the skill set. Not to take over their work, but to assist and to work in a peer collaboration fashion. Then big data analytics. We involve CSIR, and they've done phenomenal work in the N4 corridor on the simulation tool, and they're busy working with some other data as well. And we will involve them on the CPPI index to help us as well, because we want to make sure that there's reliability on the big data. And then ultimately, I think we can see now the reforms are going to take place in the rail sector, and then hopefully it will go over into the port sector, which we all want to enhance our import and export points. So with that, that is my panelists, and I think what we will do, Khaleesi will do a very nice introduction speech to us. Then we'll come to Irvin with a couple of slides, and Ian as well. And then I want, because we have got 50 minutes, I want you to encourage to ask questions. They are more than willing to take the questions and ensure that they make the awareness and the insights available that they have currently in these structures. Thank you very much. Thank you, Khaleesi.
Thank you very much, Juanita, for setting that scene for us. And good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you. We are live. Thank God. It is indeed a really honor and a privilege for me to be actually standing here again. We were here last year, but since then, we've had the opportunity to participate on this particular topic, both at your spring conference in September last year, and then again, as I said, at the AGM. But it is quite fortuitous that we stand before you again here in June, a year later. And really, for me, this has been an incredible journey since the time we stood here. We were right at the infancy of this partnership with regard to dealing with the logistics issue of South Africa, in this partnership with the government, and really we articulated what at that point in time were just the beginning building blocks of what became the journey of this year. And so for us, this milestone gives us the opportunity to reflect on the work that has been done over the past 12 months and how we are faring against the targets we set ourselves. I think it's also important for us to start, though, with a quick reminder of where this journey began. Declining volumes, service inefficiencies, high cost and low productivity were the order of the day. And the immediate cause of this poor performance, I think, are very well written about. Doesn't take much to see it right here in front of the C's here. It's very evident. This was coupled by really inadequate funding, weak implementation capability, and the diversion of resources resulted in this underinvestment in new equipment and infrastructure maintenance. Along with the loss of key critical core skills, this in turn has led to the operational inefficiencies, reduced capacity. In short, ladies and gentlemen, compared to international benchmarks, the South African rail system moves too little traffic too slowly. Another major factor is the disruption of operations due to security incidences, an issue that challenges our counterparts also in energy just as frequently. So that's where we started off. It seemed like it was a monumental task to even begin to think of addressing. But I must say, as you will hear from Ian, who will expand more on the performance thus far, and the work that we are doing with the presidency, which Irvin will talk to you about, which is part of this NLCC, we hope to give a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel that we have at least stabilized, but still need to turn the corner with speed. These are the issues which were identified for immediate intervention to improve the operational performance of industry supply chains, including freight, rail, ports, and by the way, by design, although these were not part of the original scope of work, we as business felt that we could not leave road not to be addressed because it's a critical corridor that we're going to have to find solutions to. Without a doubt, these are complex issues, not easily solved with simple solutions. However, with the National Logistics Crisis Committee work streams, resources are in place, timeframes, objectives, action plans have been agreed, and tangible progress is already being made, as you'll hear from Ian in a short while. But we are here today to talk specifically about the transformative role of the NLCC. It was not good enough to try and fix Transnet and help fix Transnet. But where is Logistics South Africa going? How do we become global competitive players in the world stage? And I think part of your deliberations is how we as a country are going to get there, because it's going to require a very collective effort by all, but it's also going to require putting SA Inc. at the forefront of everything that we do. You know, it has been very inspiring for me to watch both Chasing the Sun 1 and Chasing the Sun 2. without a vision, a bold vision, without an audacious plan that seems to defy the impossibilities, we don't begin to move. So as you are dealing with your metamorphosis here, dare to dream. Dare to dare us to become a winning nation, of which we've got the capacity and the capabilities and the people to actually do it. We just need to be inspired that it can be done. To restore the efficiency and competitiveness of our freight transport system, we must address the more fundamental structural causes of this crisis. The bottom half of the graph you will see behind me. 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 Is it there now? Thank you. The bottom half of the graph you will see behind me. The development mandates which have not received adequate oversight or proper funding, the governance issues as well as the legacy of state capture which continues to haunt us, a regulatory environment which does not encourage competition or allow third-party access. These are just part of some of the structural issues that we have to deal with. It is here that we need to implement reforms to modernize the freight transport system and create enabling conditions through legislative changes. This work, which by its nature is often more complex and takes longer to implement, this has been happening in the parallel in terms of addressing this. And Ivan Naidu from the presidency will share the progress with you shortly. But before I hand over to my colleagues for more detail on the work of the NLCC, let me reassure you all sitting here that we are not blind to the challenges which we continue to face or deaf to the calls of industry for a faster pace of change. We all want that. The somewhat unfortunate report that was released last week by the World Bank on ports around the globe highlighted once again the scale and magnitude of the problems that we as South Africa face, albeit that the rating is focused on a period of lowest performance for the country's freight logistics system, and does not take account of the work that has been done since. So for me and my team, we say that by and large, the real work, I must be very honest with you, we were here in around June last year, the real work only started in October when the new team within Transnet came on board. So we basically almost lost a whole year. So I always say to my team, you want to prove the World Bank wrong? Let's just perform. That's all that's required of us. What I am confident about, however, is that the tried and tested model of a business-government partnership continues to be the right vehicle to take us on this journey. I want to remind you all, this is the same model that we as a country used in partnership, as business in partnership with government at the advent of COVID. The same platform, the B4SA platform, is the one which at the beginning, when Reuters and Bloomberg wrote us off as a country that will never get the crisis right, at the end of the 2-year period, the World Health Organization ranked South Africa as the 4th best country in the world in terms of response to the crisis. The 4th best. Why? It was bringing the best of all of us as South Africans to say that if we don't deal with this, we all die. Simple as that. If we don't come together in dealing with the energy, with the logistics, with crime and corruption, of which are the key focal points of what we are busy addressing with. Not to say that there are many not other crises that are emerging. We see water crisis, health, education. So there's a lot of work still to be done. And we need all and everyone to collaborate, to put and roll up their sleeves. A collaborative approach which pools resources, skills, and experience is critical to address the areas that are directly and indirectly impacting our economy and are obstacles to achieving inclusive economic growth and job creation in South Africa. There is a plan. There is urgency, commitment from all role players, and we're working together to realize this plan. You all voted not too long ago. The people have spoken. People want action. People who love this country, want to see this country work and be at the top of its game. That's who we are. While we do have support of around 150 South Africa's leading businesses, entities, and their CEOs who believe in the potential of our country, and as much as we want and need a South Africa that works, organized business cannot achieve this challenge by working alone, especially given the magnitude of the task. We remain committed to this partnership, working with the government of the day, to our country, to our economy, to unlocking significant growth potential and job creation, and to reignite confidence in South Africa's future. Yesterday, in the Sunday Times, there was an op-ed that was done by organized labor and business. For inasmuch as we talk about a partnership between business and government, there is no economy without labor. So a new partnership that brings labor into the table to say collectively, putting our differences aside, but collectively for the sake of this country, how do we get it right again? And that's going to be the new essence of my presidency as the business unit in South Africa. Just as we are seeing today the need and the desire to create a government of national unity, there is a desire to create a collaborative approach with everybody who's prepared to do us in the best interest. And so, ladies and gentlemen, I wish you a very pleasant, very engageful, and a really robust engagement, because the future rests in your hands. Thank you very much.
I'm going to go behind me.
Help with Ian's slides. If you go forward, Ian.
This is like Houston, we have a problem.
There, that's fine. I think you can click the next one. There we go. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. Following on from Kolisi's stirring speech, I just want to give you a quick update on where we are a year on from June of last year when the NLCC was established by the President. At last year's conference, we really were blowing a few bubbles because we didn't know what we were getting into. But a year later, there's still days I'm not sure that we know what we've got into. But the long and the short of it is the National Logistics Crisis Committee established by the President in May and June of last year It's a construct of government. Business is not part of the NLCC. We engage with the NLCC through work streams. There's 8 of them, which I'll touch on in a minute. It's an intersect between the various government departments, in our case on the NLCC, the logistics-focused government departments, state-owned companies, and then businesses. As Mkhulisi says, we've got 150-odd CEOs that have signed up and are dealing with logistics and all the other crises. We are driven with by the North Star of the Freight Logistics Roadmap. Irvin will touch on that in a minute, and that was adopted by Cabinet back in December of last year. And it really drives every day the way that we want to handle our engagement with government. The 3 key objectives when the NLCC was established was to improve the supply chains, key supply chains of road, freight, rail, ports, dealing with implementing reforms and then creating the enabling conditions. Critically for us, we started with looking at the key supply chains of the country, and we focused primarily on the export commodities, the iron ore, chrome, coal, manganese, and then the container corridor. We've also focused through the work streams, of which you see all 8 of them up here, the road transport as well as the security aspects on particularly the rail, the chrome and the coal, as well as then on the N4 corridor. We also deal extensively with communications in the work stream number 8. The orange work streams that are set out here are the work streams where business sits on the work streams and engages directly with the NLCC members in a cadence of meetings that take place, if not weekly, bi-weekly, with a very strong focus on performance, key performance indicators, and a cadence that we're keeping to. We have to meet the presidents every 6 weeks. Mkhulisi didn't mention that. That's a big thing for us. Every 6 weeks we go to the president, and we explain what we're doing in the NLCC as we do on energy and crime and corruption. Critically, we set that cadence then for the meetings of the work streams as well. The grey-areaed or grey shaded work streams are the government work streams. These deal specifically with government policy, which Irvin will touch on, structural reform, concessioning, private sector participation, third-party access, procurement, a big issue within government circles, particularly Transnet, and then lastly, the financing of the infrastructure. And those of you that have read various research papers will be aware that that number is anything from 80 billion to 200 billion that's required. It's a critical area, and the government has got to deal with that together with private sector. We're not excluded from engaging government. We just don't sit on those work streams. We provide research, input, views, opinions to those 3 work streams. Where are we now a year down the track? We really only got going in about June, July last year. Clearly there were changes, as Mkhulisi referred to, particularly on Transnet, with the executive of Transnet in September and October of last year. Prior to that, it was a very difficult engagement framework, particularly with Transnet. But we got it right with the new executives that came in what was about September, October they came in. We focus on critical areas in our engagement and partnering, driven by corridor recovery teams in the areas of rolling stock, equipment, infrastructure, and security across rail, ports, and roads. Our interventions were many and were at times very challenging, very tedious, and honestly, at times I think we all had thoughts of, are we ever going to get this right? But 6-7 months down the track, I genuinely believe that we've got it right, we've got the relationships right, we've got the cadence of the meetings right. Some of the targeted interventions that we went through focused on procurement through a model or a mechanism called the Mutual Cooperation Agreement, which allows private sector to expedite procurement of critical spares for rolling stock particularly, and that's going to be expanded into terminal equipment and other areas where Transnet Freight Rail, Transnet Port Terminals desperately need expedited procurement processes. The mutual cooperation agreement allows for a clawback mechanism where industry will be refunded for the money that it is spending on these critical areas. We've got significant security deployment on the coal and the chrome corridors. All private sector drones, boots on the ground, 100 vehicles, helicopters, all under private management as well for a period of time until Transnet and ourselves agree that Transnet can take over the security. It's had significant benefits. We've deployed personnel from the private sector, mainly ex-Transnet people, into the offices of the Chief Executive of Transnet Freight Rail and Transnet Port Terminals, focused on operations, procurement, and locomotives in the case of TFR. And they've been warmly welcomed and are making some headway. And then lastly, through support from SAF, support from Business for South Africa, we've focused on key performance areas in Transnet Port Terminals and Transnet Freight Rail in the operating processes in what we're calling the operational excellence centers, which really are meant to be the heartbeat and will be the heartbeat of the integrated supply chains of rail, locomotives, terminals, and ports. And we've had significant success there. It's been taken over and embedded now in the Transnet structures. Similarly, through an initiative by SAF, there's been significant work done in the Transnet Port Terminals workshops to drive the availability of equipment. Some successes when we really got going back in September of last year, Transnet was projecting 140 million tons for the year to March of 25. We ended up with 152 million tons, so an increase of 12 million tons from earlier projections. So I think a significant win, or a tick in the win column on that one. We've also reduced the number of trains that have been cancelled through security incidents by over 50%. Big improvement in what was a crisis in the ports in the November, December, January of last year. World Bank notwithstanding, I think those numbers in the ports are way down in terms of the frustrating waits at anchorage and at berth. And then lastly, as Juanita was saying, on the N4 corridor, we've reduced the queues, which were sometimes as much as, 30 kilometers. We've reduced those now down to single-figure kilometer queues, and at most times they're about 3 or 4 kilometers in length through the work we've done with the CSIR, SANROL, and the revenue services. Where are we going in the next year? It's not over. We haven't even scratched the surface. The performance of TFR, particularly in April and May, hasn't been great. The recovery plan, Transnet's recovery plan, is driving their performance every day. Every single individual in Transnet is committed to the recovery plan. We are similarly committed to partnering with Transnet, with the government structures and the presidency to drive that recovery plan. There remain challenges in the rail network, the signaling, and the locomotives. We've got to stay the course, we've got to hang in there, and we've got to drive it hard. It hasn't been easy, and we've got to appreciate what Transnet particularly is going through, the significant changes, and having us look over their shoulder every week, driving those key performance areas. But we cannot give up. We've got to continue, and we're going to drive this until we achieve those targets that are set out in the Transnet Recovery Plan. I thank you.
Yeah, big crowd. Morning, ladies and gentlemen, and yeah, it's a real pleasure for me to be here. And I think after Mkolisi's inputs and inputs, you probably got a sense of 90% of where our effort as the NLCC is going. It's largely around the operational recovery as the necessary first step to go about fixing the logistics challenges that we're having. My task here is just to take you through the other non-operational aspects of the roadmap, which is largely around the reform program that we have embarked on. Now, I don't know how many of you have been out and actually read the roadmap. I mean, if you haven't, I wouldn't blame you. It's a long document, and we are trying to put a shorter, more user-friendly version of it together. But essentially, it's about repositioning our logistics system to make it more globally competitive. And we've done a lot of analysis over the years to say what is actually wrong and what is it that's holding back our performance. And the roadmap is really trying to achieve three main things. The first is to improve the competitive environment within ports and rail. For a long time, there just hasn't been sufficient competition within those markets to drive innovation. The second thing we're trying to do is to crowd in investment and also encourage partnerships with the private sector. And we all know now that the supply chains are getting increasingly complex, and very seldom are you able to find one entity that's able to fulfill all the functions along the entire supply chain. And this business, more than others, is very partnership-driven and partnership-dependent. So part of the roadmap and the transformation plan is to see how you can facilitate that coming together of the role players. And I think the third thing we're trying to do is just to enable globally competitive supply chains. For the longest time now, when we talk about reform, we talk about the different modes of transport and what we're going to do to try and reform rail and what we do to try and reform ports. The roadmap is bringing another dimension, and that's the dimension of the supply chain. It's saying that while your modes are important, it's important to focus on your end product. It's the supply chains that need to compete and get the products to the markets. And so we have to have that lens when we talk about how we're reforming the system. So we've got a short summary on the slide here of the journey we've been through. And you can see it's been a long process. Initial workshops out in October 2022, and final draft developed and approved by Cabinet in December 2023. But what was interesting about this process is that it was very, very, very consultative. So we've got a lot of support from both labor and from organized business for both the strategic intent and the reform program captured within the roadmap. And very recently, in March, there was a significant milestone with Transnet releasing their network statement, which we'll get to in a short bit now. So what are some of the key activities that form part of this structural reform program? This is just some of the highlights. It doesn't talk about everything that we're doing. But you see under number one is what Ian has just covered. As we said, the operational recovery is the necessary, necessary first step of this reform program. But similarly, we've got the establishment of the National Ports Authority, and what we're talking about there is establishing the Ports Authority as an independent subsidiary of Transnet, so that it can better fulfill its function of licensing port terminals, providing oversight, facilitating investment into the port system. Establishing a separate infrastructure manager for rail. So one of the key things that the broader reform program is doing is it's looking at separating infrastructure from operations as part of this objective of improving the competitive environment. So you have separate infrastructure owners and various users that can then access and compete on that infrastructure. So within freight rail, you needed to create the infrastructure manager as a separate entity, and that process is well advanced now. And how we're seeing it manifesting is in the network statement that was released in March. And the network statement is basically establishing the rules and mechanisms for how you would access the rail network as a private operator. So that process is now out for public comment, or the public comments have closed, and comments are being consolidated and considered, and recommendations are being made to the Ministers of Public Enterprises and Transport. That will result in us refining it, coming up with a final network statement that then parties can use to access the system. We're anticipating that access to that network will commence early in the new year. We've got a slide on that. There is also part of the reform program that's dealing with right-sizing the rail network. So one of the things that our diagnostic found is that the rail network at the moment is too big to be commercially viable for the country. And there is a need then to shrink it to the right size, find different ways of dealing with the non-dense sections of the network. But essentially what we hope to achieve through the right sizing is to make sure we can concentrate available funds into the right parts of the network. There's also strategic private partnership opportunities or transactions that are underway. I think the one that's most advanced at the moment is the partnership for the Durban Container Terminal. We had hoped to be further along. Unfortunately, that's been subject to a court challenge from one of the bidders now. So we're waiting to see how that plays out, which would then actually give us a lot of lessons so that we can start to accelerate more of the transactions within the portfolio. There is the implementation of the economic regulation of transport bill. That's been through all consultative processes now. It's sitting with the president for signature, and hopefully we would get an economic regulation of transport act. And what that act is trying to do, very importantly, it's establishing a single economic regulator for transport. And one of the things that allows us to do is look across the supply chain and start to apply our regulatory lens along a supply chain rather than just, as is currently the case, for a single mode of transport. And finally, looking at developing an appropriate and sustainable subsidy framework for network infrastructure so that we can fund it in the most optimal way and target the outcomes that we're seeking from the reform program. I won't spend a lot of time. I see we're running out of time. Yeah, just to try and spend some time on the rail network statement and third-party access to rail. You can see that, or most of you would know, that there was a public information or comments session last month, and that those consultations are now being consolidated and analyzed so that the network statement can be updated. We're anticipating that gets done by August. Then the advertisement of applications to commence in September. In parallel, there is a process to what we call release the prospectus of low-density lines that have been identified for closure. And the idea behind that is there might be certain segments of the market that would like to take over those lines for their own reasons. And prior to closing those lines, you want to give partners an opportunity to make proposals to keep them alive. We would do the evaluation of the slot applications in December, the slot allocation and commencement of operations for successful applicants in Jan, And we anticipate that the infrastructure manager would be properly established as a full division within Transnet by April 2025. So just out of this process, there's a fair number of opportunities for the private sector to start participating, both in rail and in ports. And I think Mkolisi and Juanita made the point that it's no longer about public versus private, and then what we're seeking to do now is find mechanisms to bring both parties together and collaborate more efficiently. So, this NLCC actually gives us hope for a number of reasons. But one of the big things is it starts to put out a model of cooperation and collaboration that's going to be really useful in this logistics space as we move forward. So, with the reform will come opportunities, rolling stock opportunities, operation of freight terminals. There'll be concessions of certain segments of the network, concessions of branch lines and low-density lines, and some scope for strategic equity partnerships. And I think this space is actually poised to transform quite significantly over the next 12 months to 24 months. And just want to reiterate, what we're trying to do is get that competitive environment stronger, push more partnerships with the private sector, and crowd in investment into the freight system. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kulisi and Ian and Evan. I think it will give you great insights to see where we are. It's a journey, we're not there yet, and I think, as Kulisi was saying, it's not the government, it's all of us to work into a structure where we can contribute and make sure that our logistics network works. So we have 3 minutes over, so maybe if I can get a roaming mic, if you can maybe ask 2 free questions from the audience, and then we will ask our panelists to answer them. Kobus, you're more than welcome. You actually can take the podium.
Good morning, and I think on behalf of everybody, thank you very much. Thank you not for the hour on stage, but for the year of immense work. I would dare to say that not many people sitting here today understand how tough this is and how big the breakthroughs are that you've made to actually get the public sector and the private sector to work together. So thank you very much, and maybe a more inspired applause for the team up there. I do have a question. My question, Kolisi, is in this room you have a collection of supply chain professionals across industries, and that's actually the beauty of this conference, is that you have people here that understand a little bit of what you've talked about today, being really hard logistics and high volumes, but you also have people that deal with very complex logistics, and whether that's for electronics or healthcare. My question is, how can we, who are not organized business and are not the CEOs of big businesses, how could we work with you? How could we, as the private sector, as the specialists, help you to work with government? Because we don't want to sit here in 5 years' time, or 4 years in the 50th conference, and talk about the National Pharmaceutical Crisis Committee, or about the National Agricultural Crisis Committee. How could we actually get involved to do these things before it's a crisis? Because we all saw the Transnet crisis evolving, and it was for the absolute inspiration of people like Saf and Juanita, yourself, that got into the crisis. But my question is, and maybe a few words on how do we help you? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that question. And ideally, we shouldn't be sitting here today talking about a crisis that could have been avoided. I think partly the reforms that are taking place. None of these reforms, by the way, the fiscus is pretty much not in a position to bring this type of investment. Irvin has highlighted the various areas with which the private sector itself has the opportunity to actually look at these opportunities and say, where can I play here? The nice thing is that it's not going to be dependent on Transnet anymore to decide whether you can play or cannot play. A very important factor. The structural reforms takes that decision away from Transnet to be the player and the referee at the same time. It allows a structure where you can see an opportunity of how you want to play. As Irvin says, put forward your proposals, your applications, whatever, in the same way that we've seen with the RIP windows, you know, on the energy side, where there will be various bid windows, where the opportunities for you to bring your project, and because we're opening competition now, okay? You're going to have to compete. We're creating an environment for you to compete fairly with Transnet, equally with Transnet. You can partner with Transnet, but you can also decide to say, we want to do it on our own. But at the end of the day, is it going to be in the best interest for the country? That's what's going to be very, very important. So there are two parts to your question. There's that part which says, yes, whilst we're on this journey around dealing with the performance, what role can we play? Okay? And each time somebody else asks me that question, I normally point to my right. I say, there's Ian, there's Juanita. Go and talk to them and tell them what you've got to offer and see whether there is an opportunity. But also remember, we are trying to manage a very delicate situation where you don't become an insider. Because remember, at the end of the day, if you're going to be bidding for this thing, you can't play now. Otherwise, it creates a very, it really, from a governance point of view, it's not good, okay? So I always say, yes, we do need critical skills. But we always say, if you want to come now, you may be closing the door for yourself when it's opening up now and you've got to bid for it, because you'll be considered an insider. Get yourself ready, it's coming. Already, as Irvin said, whilst you are seeing this road, this timeline, there are mechanisms which are being looked at as how we can actually fast track that in the interim. We have been able to bring in Mrs. Breitenbach, who ran and established the PSP office, IPP office on the energy side. As I'm talking to you right now, she's establishing the PSP unit that drives the structural reforms. We brought her in, business brought her in, paying for her resources so that we can fast track all of these things. It's happening. So these timelines, when we put them here, we're talking about action behind the scene that is not very visible, but to meet that timeline. Because the freight logistics roadmap is very clear on the timelines. It's enshrined in the document. And Treasury is actually monitoring that on a regular basis as part of its condition for that guarantee, 47 billion rand guarantee. So it actually forces action. I hope I have answered you in a long-winded way. Thank you.
I don't want to go into the next session, so this screen's already red here and it's all the alarms that's going off. So I want to encourage you when we have coffee, tea, Khaleesi and Irvin and Ian is going to be here. Please engage with them. They're doing, as Kobus said, a phenomenal work. And Khaleesi always said to me that he wants to retire, or he was retired, but he's doing it for the love of his children. And when I saw him yesterday at the airport, I was wondering to myself, Khaleesi, will I ever do that for my country? It's a Sunday, it's not easy to travel these days. And he just had a smile on his face. He said, Junita, I'm doing it for my grandchildren and I'm committed. And I think that tells you, the people, that we've got insight to help us to make sure our supply chains is sustainable. So give them a round of applause. They deserve it.